Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. Ever wonder what silence sounds like when the world stops breathing? I mean, really stops. Not the quiet of a late Tuesday night in Viridia Springs, where the only sounds used to be the geothermal plant sighing in the distance, or the last train pulling out towards the Rockies. No, this is different. This is a silence that screams. My name is Arthur Bellwether. Art to the few who knew me before. Well, before. I was the night watchman here at KVR, the local radio station. Just a guy watching the clock tick, making sure the building didn't burn down. Now I'm this voice in the dark. And this old studio, this little booth, it's become something else. A lighthouse, maybe. Or just a slightly less terrifying patch of shadows. We're about 48 hours into whatever this is, this unraveling. Take a deep breath wherever you are. Feel that? That's the air of a world that's changed. But you're still breathing it. Hold on to that feeling, clutch it tight. It's one of the few things left that's truly yours. It started subtly, as these things probably always do. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. A series of oddities that prickled the back of my neck. 2 nights ago, the call started coming in. Not to the official station line, that was dead even then, but to the old forgotten request line, the one that probably hadn't rung since disco was king. I was doing my rounds, flashlight beam cutting through the dusty studios, and that ancient phone, a rotary no less, started jangling like a banshee. The first call was just static, then a sound. Like someone dragging wet sacks of concrete. I told myself it was interference, maybe the atmospheric pressure. We get strange weather here in Viridia Springs, nestled up against the Blackwood National Forest. Fogs that roll in thick as thieves, rains that can turn the Oakhaven River into a raging beast. But the calls kept coming. Garbled voices, snippets of screams, and underneath it all a low, almost subaudible hum. It's a sound you feel in your teeth more than hear with your ears. Why the darkness reveals truth, they say, is because it strips away who you thought you were. The person I was 48 hours ago? He's a ghost. He believed in official channels, in explanations that made sense. He thought a locked door was enough. He wouldn't have believed the stories trickling in from the truckers on their CBs, talking about Interstate 15 looking like a junkyard derby run by madmen, or the panicked whispers from the night shift nurses at Viridia General before their lines went dead too. They mentioned patients agitated, strong, with a strange thirst, not for water. The official news, the little that flickered on the TV in the break room before it all went dark, called it a localized riot or civil unrest. Standard procedure for keeping sheep calm while the wolves are at the door. But the hum grew louder, the stories wilder. Someone mentioned the tube in London had gone silent. A friend of a friend swore the highways around Sydney were gridlocked with abandoned cars. It felt like the planet itself was developing a fever. I'm no hero. I'm a night watchman. My domain was usually a thermos of lukewarm coffee and a dog-eared copy of some thriller. But I know this building. I know the backup generator, the emergency broadcast system. And I know that sometimes the only thing worse than the fear is the not knowing. So I'm here for now. The antenna's still up, the power's still on, for now. When the hum gets louder, or the silence presses in too hard, try this, it helps me. Count your heartbeats. Place your hand on your chest. Feel it? That's you, still here. 1, 2, 3, still here. It's a practical exercise to stay grounded, a reminder that beneath the terror, the engine is still running. If you're out there, if you can hear this, you're not alone. Not entirely. Stay tuned. And if you know something, if you've seen something, find a way to share it. Though these days, finding a way is the whole damn trick, isn't it? The airwaves are mostly static, a symphony of a world grinding to a halt. But maybe, just maybe, this little beacon can cut through some of that. The first real sign that this wasn't just a bad night, that this was the bad night, came with Mrs. Henderson. She lived 2 blocks from the station, a sweet old lady who baked cookies for the day crew. Her grandson, young Tommy, usually called her every evening. He called the station instead, frantic. Said his grandma wasn't herself. Said she was humming, that same low thrum I'd heard on the calls. He said her eyes were vacant. I told him to lock his doors, stay away from her. I don't know if he made it. The line cut out. replaced by that damned pervasive murmur. That was the moment the floor dropped out from under me. It wasn't just distant sirens or crackling voices anymore. It was Mrs. Henderson. It was here. The change was upon us. And the silence that followed that call, that was the silence of the world holding its breath right before the plunge. I remember looking out the window of the control room, down onto Main Street. It was unusually empty, even for 3 a.m. A single car was slewed across the road, driver's door hanging open like a broken jaw. No driver in sight. Just the wind, whistling through the empty city like it was already a tomb. And the hum, always the hum, like the blood in your own veins had turned against you. What most survivors overlook in chaos is the initial pattern, the subtle cues before the storm truly breaks. We're conditioned to dismiss the unusual, to rationalize. That's a mistake you can't afford now. The first wave wasn't an explosion. It was a tide, seeping in through the cracks. Reports started to filter through on the emergency scanner I'd jury-rigged. Disturbances at the mall on the outskirts of town, near the old highway that winds towards the Canadian border. Then the downtown core, the financial district of all places. It wasn't random looting. It was coordinated, in a horrifying, mindless way. Groups of people moving with that same jerky, unnatural gait, all drawn towards something. Or away from something else. The official channels, what little remained, were spouting nonsense about a new strain of aggressive flu. Stay indoors or wait instructions. Instructions that never came. Beware of trusting the silence when it's imposed by authority. It's often when they're most lost, or worse, when they've already run. I got a call, one of the last clear ones, from a trucker named Big Jim. He was holed up at the truck stop just off Interstate 90, heading east towards Chicago. Said he'd seen it. People just changing, their eyes clouding over, a fine tremor starting in their hands, then the humming. He said they weren't violent at first, just empty echoes of people. That's what he called them, echoes. And the name stuck in my head. He said they were drawn to sound, to movement, but mostly to the living. He was a grizzled old road dog. Sounded like he'd wrestled bears in the Rockies and stared down cyclones in the outback. But his voice was tight with a fear I recognized. It was the fear of the unknown, the incomprehensible. He described one of them trying to get into his cab, not raging, but methodically, like a spider testing a web. He said, their skin, it's cold. Colder than a January morning in Manitoba. Then the line filled with a sound like 1,000 indrawn breaths, a chorus of that awful hum, and Jim was gone. The signal you're missing in the static sometimes is the sound of the world ending one person at a time. My own unease turned into something colder, sharper. The police scanner crackled with increasingly desperate calls. Units responding to multiple altercations, Elm Street. Officer down. They're not stopping. They're eating him. Then nothing. Just the squelch of an open channel and that pervasive, soul-chilling hum. Picture your hometown, the place you grew up, the streets you played on, the corner store where you bought candy. Now imagine it silent, except for their whispers, their shuffling, that god-awful hum. What would you do next? That question became very real, very fast. I started barricading the main entrance of Kiva with old filing cabinets and anything heavy I could find. Every scrape of metal on linoleum felt deafening. The station is a sturdy brick building, but it felt like a paper bag against a hurricane. The hidden mistake many survivors make, I think, is believing any fortress is impenetrable. The real fortress has to be in your head, because they're not just coming for your body, they're coming for your sanity. The news, before it completely died, mentioned a rapidly spreading contagion. Dr. Alistair Finch, a virologist from a research facility up near Seattle, had been on a grainy video feed, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He was trying to explain it, his voice strained. He spoke of a prion, airborne at first, then fluid to fluid. Not a virus, not a bacteria, but something other. Something that rewrote the brain, stripping away everything but the most primal urges. He said it targeted the limbic system, the seat of emotion and survival, supercharging aggression while simultaneously creating a strange, passive herd behavior. They are not undead in the traditional folkloric sense, he'd said, his eyes hollow. The host is alive, terrifyingly so, but the consciousness, the self, is extinguished, replaced by a resonant frequency, a collective. That's where the hum came from. Each infected individual, each echo emitting a low-frequency vocalization, and when they massed together, it created a palpable thrum, a chorus that seemed to draw more in, to coordinate them. Patient Zero, he theorized, wasn't one person but potentially a cluster, possibly originating from a deep earth drilling operation that had breached a previously unknown subterranean ecosystem. It sounded like something out of a pulp novel, but the images flickering behind him, of empty streets in Manchester, of military vehicles burning outside a quarantine zone near Melbourne, they were all too real. He mentioned how ancient wisdom often faced collapse, how societies throughout history had myths of hive-minded beings, of plagues that stole the soul. The Mayans, he said, had stories of empty walkers guided by a dark celestial body. He was cut off mid-sentence. The feed just dissolved into snow, and the silence that followed was heavier than any I'd ever known. Your amygdala, that ancient part of your brain, is screaming run right now. I know mine is, but your prefrontal cortex, the part that makes you human, that can reason and plan, it can still call the shots. Dr. Finch's words, as terrifying as they were, gave the enemy a face, a mechanism. It wasn't supernatural, not entirely. It was biology, twisted and weaponized by nature or by something else. The echoes, as Big Jim had called them, weren't just shambling corpses. They were nodes in a network, their individual capacity for thought seemingly subsumed into this chorus, and it was learning. The initial reports were of slow, clumsy individuals, but by the end of that first day, accounts were changing. They were moving faster, showing a crude cunning. They'd avoid obvious traps, even seemed to set ambushes. I heard one terrified snippet over a shortwave band, a ham operator somewhere in the Welsh valleys, describing how they'd used one of their own, a fresh echo, as bait to draw out a group of survivors. The horror wasn't just that they were lethal, it was that they were adapting. As Dr. Finch was cut off, the lights in the studio flickered. A deep groan resonated through the building, and then, from the street below, the hum spiked, a wave of sound that vibrated the very floorboards. They knew, or something did. The game had changed, and the stakes were everything. The collapse wasn't a slow crumble. It was like a rotten dam bursting. First, the power grid started to fluctuate wildly. Here in Viridia Springs, we rely on the geothermal plant, but it needs people to run it. I guess those people weren't immune. The lights would dim, then surge, then die, only for the station's backup generator to kick in with a reassuring roar. For now, communications went next. Cell towers, overloaded or unpowered, became useless monoliths. The internet, that vast web of connection, frayed and then snapped. Emergency services, already overwhelmed, simply ceased to exist. I heard a final, desperate broadcast from the Viridia Springs Police Department, a young dispatcher, her voice cracking, pleading for any National Guard units, any help at all. Then just the sound of breaking glass and a scream cut short. It's a chilling thing to hear a city die. What your body tells you when the world shakes isn't just fear. That tremor is your instinct waking up, the primal urge to survive. Mine was screaming. I had to move to make this small island more defensible. The main studio here at Kiva is on the second floor. I dragged filing cabinets, desks, even the ancient heavy water cooler, and barricaded the stairwell door. Every sound I made felt like a beacon to the things outside. Myths about surviving alone often paint the lone wolf as a hero. The truth is, surviving alone means every decision, every risk is yours. There's no one to watch your back, but there's also no one to slow you down or make a fatal mistake. It's a razor's edge. So I started broadcasting intermittently, short bursts of information, calls for any other survivors. The responses were few and terrifying. A woman from a farmstead out past the Blackwood Forest, her voice barely a whisper, described the echoes moving through the fields, not devouring the crops, but just passing, always heading towards population centers. She said they ignored the livestock, the deer. They only wanted us. Another call from a terrified teenager, hiding in a mall in what sounded like suburban Toronto, described them scaling walls, showing a disturbing agility. Their coordination was improving. It was as if the chorus, that collective hum, was teaching them, guiding them. There's a 3-step method to stay calm under threat, or so the old survival manuals say. Breathe, observe, act. I was doing a lot of breathing, a lot of observing. The acting part was getting harder. The subtle error in seeking safety is thinking it's a permanent state. Safety is a moment, a breath stolen between terrors. I remember seeing a family, through the grimy window of the newsroom, trying to make it to their car. The echoes, they didn't rush. They flowed around them, cutting off escape routes with that eerie, silent purpose. So I didn't watch the end. I couldn't. I just turned back to the microphone, my hands shaking, and told anyone listening, secure your homes, barricade your doors and windows, avoid open spaces, and for God's sake, stay quiet. Then a flicker of something different, a voice clear and strong cut through the static on a sideband frequency. Not a victim, but a fighter. A woman identifying herself as Sparrow. She said she was with a group, former military and emergency responders, holed up in the old civil defense bunker beneath City Hall. They were organized. They had a plan, or the beginnings of one. "We're not just hiding, Art," she said, her voice surprisingly warm despite the grimness of her words. "We're hitting back." She explained that the echoes, for all their unnerving coordination, had weaknesses. Their senses, while acute for detecting the living, were easily confused. Loud, chaotic noise could scatter them, temporarily disrupting the chorus. High-intensity light, particularly UV, seemed to cause them physical pain, making their skin blister and crack. "They're like cave creatures," Sparrow said, "dragged into the sun. What Marcus Aurelius would say about panic is that you control your mind, not the storm." Sparrow and her group, they weren't just weathering the storm. They were trying to redirect the lightning. They had started setting up sonic emitters, salvaged from crowd control gear, in key choke points, creating temporary safe passages. They were even working on UV flare guns. A survival metaphor for your fear. It's a river, not a wall. You can't stop it, but you can learn to navigate it, even use its current. Sparrow's group, calling themselves the Wardens, were doing just that. They gave out a coded frequency, a series of numbers that, when keyed in, would get you their updated status reports, information on echo movements, and potential extraction points for those trapped. "If you can get to us, we can use you," Sparrow said. "Doctors, engineers, anyone who can hold a weapon, even a voice on the radio, Art, keeping people from giving up." It was the first real spark of hope I'd felt in 48 hours. Practical spirituality, like the kind you find in native stories, teaches us to listen to the land, to the patterns of nature. The Wardens were listening to the patterns of this new, terrible nature and finding ways to disrupt it. They were a small flame in a vast darkness, but a flame nonetheless. I gave out their frequency, repeating it, urging anyone who could to try and reach them or at least monitor their broadcasts. Then, just as that spark of hope began to warm the cold dread in my gut, Sparrow's transmission faltered. "They're here," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "They found a tunnel, an old service conduit." Sounds of struggle, a sharp crack that might have been a gunshot or something else. Then her voice strained. "The west entrance is compromised. Fall back to..." The line went dead, replaced by a triumphant surge of the chorus, louder and more defined than I'd ever heard it. The Wardens were under attack. The battle for City Hall and maybe for Viridia Springs had begun. The silence that followed Sparrow's cut-off transmission was more terrifying than any sound. It was the silence of a lifeline severed. The chorus, that unholy symphony of the echoes, seemed to pulse with a malevolent intelligence. It wasn't just a byproduct of their condition. It was their communication, their command structure, and it was learning. I found myself talking to the microphone, not as a broadcaster, but as a man trying to make sense of the abyss. "What do they want?" I remember whispering, the words feeling heavy and useless in the oppressive quiet of the studio. What is the point of all this? The spiritual weight of silence in a crisis is that it's where you hear your own soul, or what's left of it. Mine felt like a tattered flag in a hurricane. Then the main door to the caver building, the one I'd barricaded on the ground floor, began to shudder. Not the frantic scrabbling of individual attackers, but a coordinated rhythmic thumping. Boom, pause, boom. They were working together, using something as a battering ram. My blood ran cold. This wasn't mindless aggression. This was strategy. What the ruins teach about survival is that even broken things can endure, but also that some structures are meant to fall. I knew with a certainty that settled like ice in my veins that the barricade wouldn't hold. They were coming for the station, for me. Perhaps the chorus had identified my broadcasts as a threat, a point of resistance, however small. Or perhaps they were just drawn to the last pocket of organized sound, the last beacon of defiance. The Jungian concept of the shadow, that dark repressed part of ourselves, it felt like the echoes were that made manifest. They were our collective fears, our primal urges stripped of reason and compassion now turned against us. And they were at the door. The thumping grew louder, more insistent, splintering wood. The groan of tortured metal. I had to make a choice. Stay and fight a losing battle or try to escape, to keep this voice alive even if it meant abandoning this small sanctuary. Signs you're losing your humanity sometimes include a strange detachment, watching yourself from afar. I felt that then, a cold observer in my own horror story. I grabbed a go bag I'd packed. Water, a first aid kit, a heavy wrench that felt pitifully inadequate. The emergency ladder leading to the roof access hatch seemed like my only option. As I scrambled towards it, the door downstairs finally gave way with a deafening crash, followed by a triumphant surge of the chorus, now inside the building. They were hunting me. I slammed the hatch shut behind me, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. From the rooftop, Viridia Springs looked like a dying beast, its lights extinguished, its streets filled with shadows. And the terrible hum, was everywhere. I was trapped, exposed, with the heart of the chorus closing in. The rooftop wasn't a sanctuary. It was a perch, exposed and terrifying. Below I could hear them, the echoes, spreading through the caver building, their guttural murmurs a rising tide. But up there, under the sickly orange glow of a sky reflecting fires from distant parts of the city, something shifted. Maybe it was the desperation, or the sudden stark view of the scale of this nightmare. But a cold clarity cut through the fear. I saw movement in the adjacent building, the old library. Figures on the roof, silhouetted against the smoke-choked sky, not echoes. They moved with purpose, with caution. The wardens, or what was left of them. Sparrow, her face smudged with soot, voice hoarse, was one of them. She saw me, raised a hand, not in greeting, but in a signal. They were using the rooftops, the forgotten pathways of the city, to move, to regroup. A survivor's ritual to hold on to hope. Whisper one memory to the dark each night. Mine, in that moment, was Sparrow's wave. It meant I wasn't the last man. It meant the fight wasn't over. They'd rigged a zip line, a desperate, ingenious escape route, from the library to the taller office block across the street. Sparrow gestured for me to get to the edge of the caver roof. It was a crazy risk. A leap of faith over a street now teeming with echoes drawn by the commotion. But what choice was there? Why, resilience isn't about strength, but surrender. Surrender to the reality of the situation and then finding the strength to act within it. I made it to the edge just as the first echo clawed its way onto the caver roof. Its eyes were milky, vacant, its jaw slack, emitting that low, gut-churning hum. Sparrow fired a flare, not the UV kind, but a standard red distress flare. It arced over the street, momentarily distracting the echoes below, bathing the scene in a hellish light. "Now, Art, now!" she yelled, her voice barely audible over the rising chorus. A simple way to reconnect with your will to survive. Touch the ground and remember you're still here. Or in my case, feel the wind threatening to rip you from a precarious zipline harness someone had just thrown across the gap. I clipped in, took a breath, and jumped. The journey across was a blur of wind, fear, and the terrifying sight of the street far below, a river of the changed. I landed hard on the other side, a warden unceremoniously hauling me in. Sparrow gave a grim nod. "Welcome to the resistance, Art. Looks like you're all out of studios." They had found a way to disrupt the chorus, she explained breathlessly as we moved. A complex, multi-frequency sonic pulse. It didn't kill the echoes, but it confused them, broke their cohesion, even drove some of them into a catatonic state. It was a breakthrough, but they needed to broadcast it to get the schematics out. And they needed more power, more range than their mobile unit could provide. The main broadcast tower for the entire region, Mount Crest Antenna Array, was our new insane target. The echoes were adapting, though. Some were starting to resist the sonic pulses, their hums changing pitch, trying to override the interference. The war was far from over. It was just evolving. Hold on to that memory of laughter. It's your shield tonight, a reminder of what we're fighting for. The current state of Viridia Springs is grim. Let's not sugarcoat it. We, the wardens, we've had small victories. The sonic disruptors are working, to a degree. We've carved out a few fragile safe zones, mostly in the higher districts, harder for the echoes to reach in numbers. But we've lost so much. The downtown core is a dead zone, a nest for the chorus. Interstate 95, if the faint signals from the East Coast are true, is a graveyard stretching for miles. Similar stories are trickling in from the UK. Tales of villages in the Peak District going silent, of strange silent figures seen on the moors under the relentless British rain. The philosophy behind losing hope is that it's not always a failure. Sometimes it's a surrender to what feels like an overwhelming truth. But the truth nobody tells you about isolation, the kind we're all feeling now, is that it's also where you find what you're truly made of. My last broadcast from Caver feels like a lifetime ago. Now I'm with Sparrow and her crew, huddled in a makeshift command post in the old observatory on Titan's Ridge, overlooking the city. We're planning our move on the Mount Crest array. It's a long shot, probably a suicide mission, but it's the only shot we have to broadcast the disruption frequency wide enough to make a difference. Maybe even reach other pockets of survivors, other wardens in places like Calgary, or even across the water in Perth. What most survivors overlook in chaos is that the quiet ones, the listeners, often last the longest. They observe, they adapt. We need to be more than quiet now. We need to be a roar. My role has changed. I'm not just a voice anymore. I'm a courier of information, a chronicler of this new dark age. My final advice for now is this: stay human. It's easy to let the fear, the anger, the despair hollow you out, turn you into an echo of what you once were. Don't let it. Find something to protect, something to build, even if it's just a moment of kindness to another survivor. Remember the taste of clean water, the warmth of the sun, the sound of a song that once made you happy. These are the anchors. Hold on to them. The fight is far from over. There are whispers unconfirmed of a new development. Some of the echoes, the ones exposed to the disruptors for longer periods, aren't just falling catatonic. They're changing again. Something else. We don't know what it means. Is it better? Is it worse? The only certainty is that this nightmare is still evolving. Keep your radios tuned if you can. Scan the frequencies. We'll be out there. We have to be. This is Arthur Bellwether, for the Night Beacon or whatever this has become, signing off. For now.